Hi everyone, it's finally May and that means it's time to wrap up the books I read in April. I only read 5 books in April and that's a lot less than in March, but some of them have been bigger and I do not regret anything. There is a couple of books this month that I've been thinking about reading for a long time, and I'm happy I did. Also, my focus is, as always, to find the books that you want to read in the moment and not to focus as much on what I should have been reading, so a great success in that way. I also kinda promised you a live stream in my last wrap-up video, but that hasn't really happened, but I'm crossing my fingers for this month to be the month where I finally do a live stream again. As mentioned, some of these books have been on my list for quite some time, but the first one I finished I picked up at an airport because I ran out of books again, and that is this one, Men Without Women by Haruki Murakami. So little did I know that I actually bought a short story collection, and if I had known, I think I wouldn't have done it. I've only read one book from Murakami previously, and that is what I talk about when I talk about running. That is one of my favorite books, and the writing style is amazing. The author himself also seemed to be quite a unique character, and I love that. This contains 7 stories, and it centers around men and their relationship towards women, or the lack of. I would say that it starts out kind of intimate and then develops into something more absurd. So the first stories is more 2 people talking, and then later on something a little bit different. There are especially 2 things about this book that I enjoy. The first one is that you never really know where it's all going to lead, and if you think you know, you probably don't. And it's all connected to this strange universe that Murakami has, and what boundaries he sets for himself in his writing, they don't seem to be there. It sort of helps that these are short stories so they can be really fast-paced and then have an open ending. The second thing I like is how he writes about things. So one of the central themes in this one is loneliness, but it doesn't write about loneliness as something sad or something that makes you feel pity for the main character, but rather something that's just stated. It's just something that is. People can be lonely, but there's nothing wrong with it, at the same time as it affects those people. I would say that he has an extraordinary way of making me reflect on my own thinking when I read his books. I should also mention that some of these are quite funny because they're absurd. So I enjoyed the first stories better than the last ones because they were more close and personal, I felt, and not that weird. I like him when he's weird but not super duper weird, I guess. At least that's what this book made me feel. I really enjoyed this one, and I shouldn't be surprised that I did, because I enjoy Murakami's writing, and also short stories are short, fast-paced, and you can finish one in an evening without having to spend too much time on it, so like, maybe this is the fast food of the book industry, I don't know. Also, a fun thing is that when I bought this one, the woman behind the counter actually read Kafka on the Shore by Murakami as I bought it. And, well, Norwegians don't tend to talk too much to each other, so having a conversation with someone behind the counter is kind of unique, or it hasn't happened all that often, so that was kind of fun. Who would have thought that books actually can be something social? The next one I finished actually has a lot in common with Murakami's novel, and that is A Confederacy of Dances by John Kennedy Toole. The story was written in the 60s but not published until 1980, and in 1981 it ended up winning the Pulitzer Prize. So the author died in 1969 and his mother fought for this to be published. This one has a really moving preface where it tells the story about his mother going around trying to find people to read his novel and then to get it published. The preface is more moving than the actual novel. This story is about Ignatius. He's in his 30s and he lives in New Orleans. Other than that, I struggled to find out how to exactly talk about what this novel contains. But I made a lot of notes when I read it, and I'm just going to talk you through my notes as I go. So the first thing I wrote was that he has a weird relationship to his mother, and he's also very weird. He's also quite abusive the way he talks to not just his mother, but everyone. He seems kind of deranged. He says things like, "You're shattering my religious ecstasy," which I found to be a very enjoyable sentence. He also seems kind of delusional. He shoots in all directions, he belches a lot. All the people around him also seem to be kinda strange, but you're wondering if that's because of how he talks about them or to them, or if they just are as strange as him. I believe that they will never be as strange as him, but something similar. Basically, Ignatius goes around this town and he is himself enough to make this a very enjoyable story to read. And before I bought this one, I tried finding out what it actually was about, but all places it's described how Ignatius looks and behaves, and that was supposed to be enough to tell the story. And after reading it, I understand why they did so, because trying to explain the storyline or the plot of this one, it's easier just to talk about him as a character, because he's maybe the greatest character I've read about ever. He's just like a big baby that you have some vivid pictures in your head about, and he goes around being himself. This is definitely a book more about the people than the plot, and if you like referencing, I think this one is for you. There were so many references I did not understand at all, and Ignatius kinda likes just feeling intellectual, so he says a lot of things that's supposed to be intellectual and maybe a bit confusing. I don't know, because I didn't get them all. That made me also think that this could be a great reread, because when you read more books and understand more of the world, I think you also may enjoy this one more. I ended up really enjoying this one, and it kind of surprises me because it has no clear plot or storyline that's easy to follow. It's all a bit chaotic, but the main character saves us all. 15 years ago, I thought that if I was going to start reading books, I should start with Russians and the Russian greats. And now it was time to read some Tolstoy. This is also a part of my fan favorites for 2023, because a lot of you have asked me to start with this one rather than War and Peace. So I did. And I do not regret it, because right from the start there isn't as many characters in this one as I feared. That's always a great thing, and it helps me focus on the story rather than being irritated by how many people there are in it. This is a love story, but it's not apparent that it is about Anna Karenina from the get-go. There are sort of three stories about three couples and the development of these couples over the years in 1800s Russia. As I mentioned, there are several things about this one I enjoy. The first thing was, of course, not that many people in the beginning. There are several people after a while, but then you're sort of being eased into it. The second thing is that the chapters aren't all that long, so you don't have to read about 100 pages between each chapter. This helps, especially with classic, to make them feel more fast-paced. The third thing is that it felt more nuanced, so it's not just misery from the beginning. Many classics tend to feel a bit heavy because they're all about suffering and things being bad, but this one also had happy things. People talking about marriage, for example, as something both positive and negative, and not just I was forced into this and now I'm miserable until I die. This also applies to when they discuss religion. Some people think that religion is stupid and they say it's stupid. It's not like they're afraid of saying that it's stupid. And that's kind of refreshing reading in a novel from the 1800s. This being said, I'm glad that I read it in two parts, because the first part I thoroughly enjoyed and I thought, maybe this will end up being the classic that I will give 5 stars. I've sort of been waiting for a classic to blow my mind and be amazing, and the first part was actually really good, and the second part was really terrible, and it goes into the trap that many classics do, where it's just misery, everything's bad, we're all going to die, and I hate my life. And I also hated my life when I read part 2. Maybe a bit more than I would have if the first part wasn't good either. Maybe I was just disappointed. I don't know, but disappointed I was. Of course, I'm not the right person to discuss what the differences between the writing style of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy is, but this felt less profound. I think Dostoevsky made me more think about stuff than this one did. This one made me more enjoy the story, and for that reason I enjoyed especially part 1 quite a lot. I think you all know where all this is going. I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. because I was so disappointed. I thought that finally I had found a classic that would make me happy, but I hadn't. And well, that's a shame, but I'm glad that I finally read Tolstoy. The first half made me think that maybe War and Peace is something I could do, but now I'm considering if I should just get rid of it. Then over to a book that has been bugging me, and it's the third book in the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. I read the first book around 2 years ago, then I waited for about a year, and then I thought, that's kind of stupid, maybe I should try to do something about my own timing. So now, when I read this one, it's about 6 months since last time I read a Mistborn book. But they're kind of chunky, so this one is over 700 pages. It's not every day I pick up a book that's 700 pages, so maybe that's a reason. Also, the 2 first ones I gave 3 out of 5 stars as well. They didn't actually blow my mind, and that made me reconsider reading the rest of the series. But I thought I should at least try to finish one high fantasy series, so I did. And right from the beginning, this one feels a lot more fast-paced than the other ones. It has this sense of urgency. A lot of people are scattered around different locations. They're all trying to solve problems and then try to get together to solve a bigger problem, and all of this is kind of entertaining. As with the second novel, I felt like I was thrown into a place I knew, with the people I know and a magic system that I was accustomed to. I know what the different metals do, and yeah, it's just a more fast-paced version of those 2 other ones. I felt like book number 2 was kind of just the book number 2. It's the place where nothing really major happens and you're just waiting on book number 3, which seems very silly. But I know that many fantasy readers experience this when they read a second book in a trilogy, that things aren't all that exciting. So this I actually ended up enjoying quite a lot. Do I regret reading the series as a whole? I have to think about it some more, because reading 1500 pages of 3-star isn't something I love. But this has a lot of urgency to it and a lot of cool characters that has some cool development to them. All in all, I'm finished with my first high fantasy trilogy, and that makes me happy at least. Then over to something that didn't really make me that happy, and that is Alto Pasolina and the World's Best Town. So this hasn't been translated, so this is only my translation. Or it hasn't been translated to English, just every other country's language, I guess. Maybe it has to do with how depressing Finns can be. Maybe the English-speaking world isn't ready for it. Or maybe they're just not ready for a bad book. The reason why I wanted to read this one is that I read Collective Suicide a year ago, and that is from the same author. That had all things in the world going for it, but I didn't enjoy it at all. So this church burner, or person that likes to burn churches, lies on his deathbed, and all the money that he has is going to be spent building new churches. And it all centers around this place where this new church is being built. And while this church is being built and has been built, the Third World War is starting, the US is collapsing, and our main character is sent to jail. So there's a lot of things going on, and it's quite absurd but real. It's not like things couldn't have happened, it's just more like it's unlikely, but I could see it happening. In that way, it's very Scandinavian, down to earth, so all the things can happen, but it's not likely. I think the real frustration I have with this one is that there's so many things that would be enjoyable to read about, but there's no direction at all. Things are just chaotic and happening all over the place, and nothing is really telling you what direction this all is going, without the language being able to make you fascinated by any of it. This being said, I actually laughed out loud several times during this read, because when Finns write about Finnish problems, it can get quite funny. And I never really thought I would give a book a 2-star based on how much I laughed, but it's just not an enjoyable read, even though it's funny at times. Or quite often. The good thing about having read this one is that I realized that I should have followed my gut feeling the first time around, and I actually have 2 of his other novels standing in my shelf behind me that I now know that maybe I should just get rid of them, because even though it sounds like they're going to be a whole lot of fun, they might not be. I think I'm just constantly afraid of missing out on a good story. It's like, take Neil Gaiman for example. If I read Stardust as my only Neil Gaiman novel, I would have thought that maybe he just isn't for me, but I like or love all of the other novels that he has written, so it's not always easy to tell. But now I've read 2 of Pasolina's novels, and my only problem now is that his most famous novel I've still got standing in my shelf, but I haven't read, so maybe I'll just get rid of one of his books. So these were the books that I read in April, and I'm quite happy with the fact that I actually was able to select the books I wanted to read in the moment. So having read both Anna Karenina and the last Mistborn book in 1 month, I wouldn't have done that earlier because, you know, with my reading goals and all, that wouldn't have seemed like the best idea. But yeah, I'm just happy that I prioritize correctly. Even though I didn't read a 5-star this month, I felt like I did the right thing. And now I feel like I'm rambling, but I'll save the rest of my talking to a live stream, hopefully. So if I end up doing a live stream, I'll put it on my community tab, and if you press the bell icon and notifications stuff, you'll get notified too. If you've read any good books, please comment below so we can all take part in the gorgeous literature out there. And I hope you have a terrific May. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!